All right, Jake, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure. Really happy to be here, Grant.
All right, so let's just jump in. Give us a little backstory about you, about Common Paper, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background before Common Paper, I was the co-founder of two B2B software companies. First one was called RJMetrics, and it was business intelligence, dashboards, data analytics, targeted primarily at e-commerce companies. We ran that business for about 8 years. My co-founder was a guy named Bob Moore, and we ultimately sold it to Magento, which then later went on to get acquired by Adobe. And if folks aren't familiar with Magento, it's sort of like a open source, on-prem, more enterprisey version of Shopify. And they were our biggest partner, and that ultimately acquired us to like sort of bring our reporting capabilities in-house. At RJ, we had created this like small second product, which instead of focusing on visualizing the data, it was more about bringing it together from a bunch of different sources into one data warehouse. And as part of the deal to Magento, we structured things so that we could spin that out into its own company. And that was the second one. It's called Stitch. And that was data integration. So competitor to folks like Fivetran, which is still independent. And they were like our biggest competitor at the time. We ran Stitch for a couple of years. And then that company was acquired by Talend, which is, again, sort of a older school, enterprisey version of data integration. Talend was a public company at the time. They've since been taken private. But I spent 2 years at Talend, first running the Stitch business unit, and then running growth for Talend as a whole once we got functionalized. And then left, took some time off, and then started Common Paper. And the genesis of Common Paper was really like me getting pissed off about contracts across all the experiences at RJ, Stitch, and Talend, where it just seemed like, customers, when they had decided that they had a problem and they wanted to give us money for our product to solve that problem, and then we got in a fight about the contract. And it was slow, it was expensive, it was needlessly adversarial. And then eventually, once we like signed the contract, we had to do all the stuff that we promised to do. And it was like spread across hundreds of Dropbox folders and PDFs. And so Common Paper was sort of like the genesis of it was solving that problem that I felt like I was banging my head against the wall on, and recruited. I had been pitching one of the early RJ engineers, this guy named Ben Garvey, to work with him again for years. And then finally, when my pitch was come start Common Paper with me, he was like, yes. So we're working on this for a couple of years. And yeah, that brings us to today.
And so, I definitely understand the problem that Common Paper is solving.
Yeah.
Tell me more about the product and like how you solve it.
Yeah. So there's a couple components to it. So the first piece, what we actually built first, is standardization of the contract itself. So folks might be familiar with like the SAFE, which YC created, this early stage standard contract for fundraising. And if you fundraised not on the SAFE and fundraised on the SAFE, one thing that you know is that a lot of complexity and annoying things are solved by using a contract that the other side has also seen a million times before. Mm-hmm. There's a handful of variables that you're optimizing around, and then a lot of it is just the standard SAFE that we've used. And so we've created an analog of that, but for B2B software sales. So it includes a sales contract, an NDA, an SLA, a DPA, a bunch of other like compliance related things around the sale, a pilot agreement, design partner agreement, LOI. And one of the first things we did at the company was we recruited this committee of about 45 attorneys that we modeled after an open source project. So they are effectively like contributors or to the project. And one of our first hires was effectively the maintainer of the project, this woman named Tiffany, who's a super experienced, legit attorney who has like both been at big law firms as well as like, rocket ship tech companies. And she is running this committee process, gathering feedback, facilitating these like debates. And instead of pull requests, there's like Redline Word docs getting sent around. But it's the same sort of thing that you could imagine, is happening in an open source project, just around like what should be in this contract, what's market, what should be standard, and what's a variable. And then she goes through this process of synthesizing all the feedback and then creating, okay, this is the Common Paper NDA version 1.0. This is the cloud service agreement 2.0 or whatever. And they're all versions. So like, people know what changed, and we show, okay, because the market changed, now AI is a thing, there's a standard AI clause or whatever, we release those under Creative Commons license. So again, like an open source project, they're totally free. I think they've now been downloaded many tens, we might be up to hundreds of thousands of times that people just download these templates and they can use them however they want. So that's this standards piece. And one of the things that we collaborated on is this software license agreement for on-prem deployments, where originally we were only working with cloud software companies. And then something that you know better than me is a lot of times when you go after the enterprise, they care about, behind the firewall deployment or within their VPC. And so this is a contract that's like made from the ground up for that. And with in mind that someone might use the cloud service agreement as well as the software license agreement, depending on their customer base. So those are the standards. We also, the first product we built around those standards was contract management. So basically helping a company customize the template to their particular company as well as their particular customers. So you might have templates that are like, these are our defaults. This is the description of our product. This is our default, support hours or whatever we're promising to. And here's our pricing model. And then, there's like the initial problem of the founder who, needs to close their first deal. And then hopefully the founder's closing a bunch of deals. They're maybe hiring sales folks and they want to give some flexibility to those sales folks, but not infinite flexibility. So the contract management software enables the right amount of customization depending on what the policies are. And then like generates those contracts, captures signatures for those contracts, and then crucially like uses the data in those contracts for all the other stuff the business needs to do. And all of it is addressable via an API. So like, as an example, one of the things that makes possible is that, we have an integration with like Stripe, where the instant your customer signs a sales contract, we can take all the terms of that contract and generate the customer record, the subscription, the invoice in Stripe so that your customer immediately gets redirected to a custom payment portal with whatever terms they negotiated in that contract. Or, you might have your account management team might need to know like, what are all the contracts that have 30-day opt-out periods on renewal? What are the ones that don't have auto renewal? So all that structured data within the standards, and people have access to that data. So that's all contract management. And then the newest thing that we have released, this in private beta now, is Jerry, this AI agent for Redlines. And that is basically, you can forward emails to it, you can upload Word docs, and you can actually also set it up to just like listen to your Gmail and basically watch for any redlined Word docs that come in and automatically compares those things to your company policies and, positions. And then before you even know the red line is there, it'll respond to that email just to you and say, hey, this is safe to sign. This actually, all these red lines are within your policy. They just made minor changes. Or, this one needs to get escalated to the CEO because they're asking for this crazy thing that's, you don't allow. Or this one needs to get, moved to the head of CS. And so it both checks things and then figures out who within the company needs to sign off when it requires manual review. So that is solving that red line problem. So yeah, those are the different pieces of what we do.
Very cool. Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, because I kind of knew the original story around, the common paper, the Creative Commons, and then some of the contract management stuff. But I hadn't heard of the AI tooling that you built, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that one's the newest. And there's like there are pieces of what Jerry does that was baked into the contract management tool for a while, but it increasingly made sense for us to like separate that out into its own product, partially because that there's not perfect overlap in the customers who need it. Like the contract management tool assumes that a lot of the stuff you're doing is around standards, where Jerry can work with any Redline contract. It's more like looking at like, okay, what are you sending to your customer and what are they sending back to you? And so it's more about looking at like, what have they changed? And then how do those changes line up with what you want? Where the standards are more about like the standardization and structure. So they work really well together, but it made sense to have Jerry as a separate app because some of it's bigger companies, some of it's people that are just working in different ways. But yeah, and that's the newest thing that we've done. It's also a lot of stuff that like wasn't possible a year or two ago.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I mean, one of the things you kind of mentioned briefly, but I think is just so important is really understanding like giving anyone an idea of what is market, right? Like that's just like one of these concepts, you're like, I get this red line back from some company that I'm trying to sell something to. And as a founder or even like a salesperson, if you haven't done like hundreds of these deals,
Yeah.
even then you're like, you don't know if this request they're making or if the way they're wording it is like some,
Hmm.
lawyer trick to like, like shift all the liability over to you or do something that you like, something that you wouldn't normally do. And understanding what is market, I think is ends up being one of the most, it's basically what you're paying lawyers for. It's like you're paying them to like interpret and
Hmm.
explain to you so you can like decide if that's the right thing for you, but then also guide you around, this is an out of market ask, like we don't need to accept this, we can, you know
I think it's a really good point. And then it's one of my most common questions for our attorneys, like when I'm fundraising or doing whatever kind of deal, that is just like, is this normal? Is this market? Just
yeah
because like for a lot of this stuff, I may have a gut reaction, but that might just be the way these deals happen. So that's like, and yeah, like we now have like literally, more than $10 million of deals every month flowing through our system. And so we have this really unusual view into what is market. We actually like have released benchmark reports that are just sort
Mm,
of like, okay, at this point in time, how common is unlimited liability? Like, what
sure.
is the most common thing? Or, like our most, there's like a million things that most people, unless you are negotiating these deals all the time, you may not even heard of it before. And so you just don't know, like, is that a reasonable request? And then, like, that you don't necessarily want to do it just because it's common, because maybe for your company it's the wrong thing, but that's at least like a really helpful data point for informing how you should respond to this and like how the other side is going to respond if you push back on that, because that may sort of like make you look like you have no idea what you're doing, or potentially, ideally, you can sort of up level your position in their eyes too.
yeah and it is the contract negotiation is like definitely one of my least favorite parts
Yeah.
of like the whole thing. Maybe up there with like, employee misbehavior, right? Like those are like it's
Yeah.
like those are two unfun problems to deal with. And I think your point is like, because like it is confrontational. You don't
Yes.
really, you're like, I'm trying to be on the same side as my customers. I'm not trying
Mhm.
to, so I always said like the golden rule for us was like, we should never put a contract in front of someone else that like we wouldn't sign.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's like, I just fundamentally believe that it's like, if we would laugh at this, the other side, then like,
Yes.
why would we try to put those terms in front of someone else? And then, yeah. And then trying to understand what's market. And then the other lesson I've learned is like dual tracking the like
Mhm.
purchase process and the legal alongside of like a POV is like a really good exercise, because it gives you a chance to like, hey, we're gonna like do the tech eval and the integration and do all that stuff simultaneously while we negotiate the terms. And I think there's this like interesting balance there, because it's kind of like you can get the tech folks to put a little more pressure here, and you can like say, hey, well, like maybe we can't give you that term if you're going to
Yeah.
not pay as much as you want it, right? So it's like the whole balance.
I think a lot of people who are not as experienced as you have like the opposite intuition about that, which is that like, I know the contracting process stinks, and I know that's going to be a sticking point. So like, maybe if I don't bring it up, they won't bring it up. And like, maybe that works if you're like selling to like an SMB, or like,
Yeah,
just like an individual person. But when you are selling to the enterprise, yeah, like that, I think you're exactly right. Where if there's a bunch of things that take a long time, and you can execute them serially or you can execute them in parallel.
right.
And I think it's sort of just like good sales practice to ask your champion or whoever your contact is be like, tell me about the last time you bought something like this, and what was the process? Who are all the people that had to sign off? What are the checks? And then just get all those things. And then like, you're managing it like a project, because that's what it is. And part of it is getting them excited, but part of it is just like pushing it through those things. And as much as you can run those in parallel, the whole thing will be shorter. The downside is that you may waste more resources if one of those things is a blocker, because you're investing in all that. But that's a good trade-off, is to try to make it as fast as possible, even if you end up getting stuck somewhere, because then you can just spend those resources somewhere else.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing that you said that I think, again, I completely agree with, but is actually like, there are super experienced people who disagree with you, is like on the, like, don't put anything in front of the customer that, you wouldn't sign, or vice versa, like
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
like that golden rule. And I
Yeah.
think there's a school of thought, which I don't share, which is that, like, there is a pie, and it's much more zero sum. And it's just like, I'm going to start with everything super favorable to me, because I assume they're going to try to move everything in their direction. So I want to start as close to me. And then that helps me out. And I think a big part of what that misses is, like, even if it is successful in making, like, the terms more favorable to you, and I'm not totally sure that it is, it, like, is adding so much friction in all the deals, and it undervalues the delay of that friction. And it's like shocking what a big lever, like, sales cycle velocity is. I actually, one of, like, the first blog posts we made at Common Paper was, I made this big Google sheet of, like, here's a fake company, just change the input of, like, it's a
Mhm.
4-month sales cycle versus a 3-month sales cycle versus a 2-month sales cycle, and no additional capital raise, no additional marketing budget, same win rate. And it's just like the sales growth of that company, because you can recycle the cash so much. So in any case, it's
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, because and especially if you get annual prepayments, it's less extreme
Sure.
if you're paying monthly, but it's sort of like an e-commerce company or a retail company that can turn their inventory really fast. You can, when that customer pays back, you can then spend that on customer acquisition for the next one, and just turning that capital, that whatever much you have, you can get many more turns out of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that a lot. I hadn't thought about that as a reason. I mean, the way that I've always approached it is like, I'm like, hey, look, I think this is the right way to do business, and I
Yeah,
try to do business like in the spirit of the deal.
sure.
And I think it like it allows me to like go to someone and be like, I gave you the contract that I think I would have signed. I think you
Yes.
should sign it. Like, I'm not moving. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like it allows me to be like, I'm not going to move on that. I already
Totally.
gave you like, so, because I think when someone tells me, oh, like, it's like the price, like they anchor it really far away.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, well, you're going to negotiate because that's an
Mhm.
insane price.
Yes.
Like, so, you know, now all I have to do is try to find the lowest price. Whereas if they give me a fair price to begin with, I'm like, okay, that's a fair price, right? Like, you know, I'll probably that's probably not. I'm probably not trying to negotiate that much. So
Yeah, I agree. For the record, I don't think I'm very good at negotiating, and I definitely don't like
yeah,
it. I took a negotiation class in college, and, like, I feel like I
yeah,
learned a lot in it. And one of the things we learned about is, like, there's some people that are, like, really extreme positions, and, like, getting walked back and all that. And I remember reading about, I'm going to mispronounce his name. His first name was Wayne. His last name was, like, Hazinga or something like that. He created both, like, Blockbuster and Waste Management. They were both, like, roll
mm.
ups of all these, like, small little mom and pop, in one case garbage businesses, in another case video
Oh,
stores.
yeah,
And he was, like, very much like you're describing. Like, he did a million deals, and each of them he just, like, did a bunch of research and basically said, okay, this is what I think a fair price is, yes or no.
take it or leave it. Yeah,
Yeah. And it
yeah,
was, like, actually a fair price. And, like, I think because he wanted to do it with velocity, I can imagine if you're, like, doing a bunch of really bespoke things, and it's like you're going to do one deal ever, you want to hyper optimize it and not think about, like, but I also, similar to you, like, this is the way that I like to operate. It's just, like,
yeah,
transparent and open, and not a lot. Like, I'd rather focus on making the product better, providing great service, time with my team, rather than, yeah. So I'm on the same page.
yeah. It's sort of like it's a different like worldview, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the view of the fixed pie versus like, I'll just make the pie a lot bigger,
Yeah,
right? And that's the answer.
totally.
Yeah,
And this whole thing about, like, this is what I would sign, this, is very much the ethos that are embodied in the standards. Because
yeah,
one of the things that the people who use them get to say is that, like, they didn't make this thing. It's not like there's some, like, it was all super favorable to them. Like, lots of companies use this. And in a lot of cases, people use this both for procurement and, for selling their stuff. And, the magic really happens is, like, when two people who are on the standards meet, where it's,
mm,
like, the same thing, where it's like, you fundraising on the safe with an investor who's done the safe a million times. It's like, we're using a safe. It's this gap. It's this much. Yes or no?
Right.
There's still a lot of stuff to talk about, but it's like, do you
Sure.
want to do this deal? Not
Yeah.
what's in the third red line of this thing or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering how you've kind of, there's kind of that supply and demand side. Like, how have you approached the procurement side?
So most of our like customers of the software are vendors. We have lots of people using the docs for procurement, but that is like we think about like distinct audiences kind of for the docs, the contract management, and for Jerry. There's a lot of overlap there, but we part of how we thought about this, and this was an evolution in like from when we started the company. At first, we thought about our target market as like, okay, anyone B2B software transactions, buying and selling any size. And we had several months of just sort of like running as fast as we could, but feeling like we weren't making progress.
Hmm.
And as is a lot of cases, we realized, okay, we need to refine our target market. And so, on day one, if Jake Stein says this is a standard contract, you should use it, at the response of everybody in the world is, who's Jake and why should we care? Like, I don't like, this is a standard because you say so. And so the way we sort of resegmented the market was in the very early days, we said, okay, who's going to be the earliest adopter of this? Because this is like, there is a network effect here. The more people who use the standard, the more valuable the standard is. So how do you overcome the cold start problem? And the way we thought about it is like, okay, companies at their earliest stage, there's no switching cost. They're like,
Sure.
they need a standard. And it's typically like they get a verbal yes from their first customer. That customer says, okay, send me over your NDA or send me over your sales contract or send
Yeah.
me an LOI. And that founder is like, oh, okay, I need to go get one of those things.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
it might be a technical person who's never been involved in the sales process, maybe
Yeah.
not involved in the legal process. And so we wanted to be, okay, can we be top of mind for that person or the recommendation their investor makes to them or their accelerator or whatever. And so that was how we thought about, getting the initial critical mass and have since expanded out from that.
Interesting. Yeah. It's a very interesting approach. It is. I'm guessing it is hard. Like changing the paper that you use, like to do a deal, is like a pretty big. Like no, like everyone's like the paper works. The salespeople don't want new paper. Like
Yeah.
they know, no, like yeah. So that's a hard. It's a hard. There is a high switching cost there.
You're correct. There's a high switching cost. I think there's also a psychological thing that
Yeah.
is in some cases disproportionate with the real cost, because it's like, it's just like we know legal stuff is annoying. And
Yeah.
so you're asking me to change the legal thing. It's sort of like making front loading that problem to a degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's much easier to either get a brand new company or a company that is adding something like
Mm,
they only did cloud before and now they're adding on-prem,
sure.
or now they're going to become HIPAA compliant, so they need to sign BAAs. Like, whatever the thing is, that's often the wedge in. Or it's like switch with the NDA first. That's an easy one, and then see how great that is to use. And you're like, oh, you know what? I kind of wish our sales contracts were more like this. Excuse me.
No, that makes sense. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I guess like the hope or the intention of the business there is like if some of these become the next big, you know, vendor,
Mhm.
then you can scale with them, and that's a pretty, yeah, that's a good story.
Exactly. So yeah, there are companies that they used us for literally their first sale, and they now have a 30-40 person sales team, and they've used us for either 100% or very close to all the deals they've done. And then since, as we've gotten more traction with those people, as you can imagine, some people that already are going are like, oh, I was a customer of this other company and that was a really nice experience. I would like
Mhm.
that process for my
Mhm.
customers. Or it just seemed like you eliminated a lot of the nonsense from this. And so that has helped us get some people to switch over. And it's also sometimes we get people who are already on the standards and then only a year or two in come in for the software. So it's really like, again, modeled after an open source project where like you're using MongoDB. later you need a Mongo Enterprise, or you could start with the on-prem version and switch to Atlas. It can go in a bunch of directions.
Yeah, and I'm guessing like, I mean, maybe you might maybe have this data, but I would assume that the results that you want to show for your customers are both like lower legal expenses
Mhm.
and more and faster, faster contracting. Does that feel right? Does it feel like the two?
I would say I would put faster number one. Yeah, and so lower legal is certainly one. One of the other things that like people
I mean, those two
often
kind of
tell
go
us,
hand in hand, right? Like the
yes,
time and money with lawyers is like, that's a
that's
real,
true.
yeah,
The thing that also sometimes happen, this is especially true for people that have like in-house counsel, where like those attorneys have strategic projects that they want to work on, and then every month they have to drop that to support the sales team for the monthly
sure,
close. And so this might not change their legal bill at all, but maybe their attorneys are working on much higher value stuff that
sure,
is more interesting to them. So it can go in that direction, but you're sort of, especially if you have outside counsel, it's more of a one-to-one relationship. But actually, some of the more sophisticated people we talk to, especially the ones that have scale, they have switched to like subscription billing with their attorney, where it's like you were going to support us, and then that aligns incentives in some cases. It's still a minority in cases, but I think it's really
sure,
smart. And then that attorney is sort of like partners with them on, I want to make this as easy as possible. I want you emailing me never. And so
yeah,
they're helping them deploy tools or set up playbooks or things like that. And then especially with Jerry, in a lot of cases, we'll be working we have a couple things like that now where we're working with the outside counsel and the company, where the outside counsel is helping to set up Jerry so that all of the like repetitive low level stuff that used to go to the outside counsel, they're saying, here's how we always answer this question.
yeah,
You don't need my brain for that. And we don't need your brain for that. And then, only the more sophisticated stuff gets escalated to them.
yeah. And I mean, if I think like, a claim that you can make over time, if you can, just be like, hey, we helped X company,
Yeah,
speed up their sales cycle from, 90 days to 60, whatever it is.
100%. Yeah.
And, being able to show that broadly, I think is a powerful claim
Mm-hmm.
for people. And then to your point, if that velocity, can give you more turns, like there's value there. So
Totally. And I also think it's like, even so, I think the quantitative thing is really powerful. It's like the economic argument that's easy to justify. I think there's also a like, for lack of a better word, a vibes based thing where like a sales rep, it's the last day of the quarter. And even if like, it takes 5 hours for the attorney to turn around a doc, which is really fast,
yeah,
like they're freaking out during that time.
yeah,
And so if we can, for at least a subset of their contracts, change that turnaround time to 5 minutes,
yeah,
and like the founder is not texting the attorney saying, what are you doing? I need to do that. Like, that's just like a much better experience. It's hard to quantify. And, maybe
sure.
the ROI case is not clear, but I think that's better. And then it's also, you can sort of, I think some of that, customer relationship stuff you were talking about before, you can just like make you easier to do business with.
Yeah. I mean, particularly like as we look to automate more of the like back office rote
Mm-hmm.
tasks that we kind of all, have to manage and put up with. I mean, like this is also not the like highest value time for your seller, for your CEO, for anybody else. It's like managing the contract. It's like part of the job, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
like, it's not really generating new biz, right? Like getting new leads, working new deals, solving new customer problems. It's like it is the, you know, epitome of some of that blocking and tackling that you have to do in order to like sell software. So
Yes, this is no one gets into sales because they're excited about the contract piece. I mean, if they were excited about that, they'd become an attorney or a paralegal. This is just something that they have to do, and different companies have the salespeople involved in that different amounts. But yeah, it's very easy to get people on the revenue team, sales ops, or what have you, like talking about the challenges here. It's not that's not the hard part of this, where people feel like there's a problem.
yeah. And so I mean like let's hit a couple terms. Like give me some what is market, right? Like, and liability, auto renewal, like hit some of the high points, on some of these contracts around like what's market today.
Yeah. For sure. So, I mean, by far the most common thing for liability is a 1x cap, and that 1x is based on, and this is a little nuance here, the fees paid or payable in a given year. And
Yeah.
so that, sometimes it used to be mostly like fees paid, but then they realized, okay, there's a loophole if the customer just doesn't pay their bill. So
Mhm.
it's like, what is, owed there? Often, like, that changes if you're either selling to a big enterprise or you have like you're touching some like particularly sensitive data, and then what there will be is like potentially progressively higher caps for certain categories of things. So it's
Mhm.
like, okay, if you there's a data breach or you do what's called like gross negligence or misconduct, like if you really f up, then there'll be a higher cap. And if you're selling to the enterprise, it might be a higher multiple, or they might just say it's 5 million or something like that. The people, well, one of the biggest questions we get is like, hey, if my customer asks for unlimited liability, how
Right.
common is that? It's in less than 1% of the deals on our platform. Those deals are disproportionately with big enterprises, and that's sort of like, for a lot of companies, that's just a red line. They won't do it
Yeah.
because like you can't buy insurance that covers unlimited liability. And then some people, they decide it's worth it because this is the big deal, and if we want to sell this company, they need it. So it's a judgment call.
And then
um,
even when you're giving unlimited, you're normally just trying to scope it to like,
yes.
as few things as possible in that scenario, right?
Correct. You're exactly right. So you try, the goal is, number one, keep the caps low and then keep them as narrow as possible. So you're exactly right. So maybe, one thing that people will sometimes say is, okay, we'll do a higher cap for gross negligence or misconduct, or maybe we'll do unlimited for just that. And then the other thing, and this is again too far in the weeds, we could just edit it out later. There's like indemnity, which basically means like how much it's almost like you're insuring the other side
Right.
for problems like that a third party comes in and makes. So like the
Right.
classic example of what like a vendor might in the contract say the customer indemnifies the vendor for like if the customer uploads like pirated content or something to the product. And so
Mhm.
it's like clearly it's the customer's fault if they're doing that. And then what might happen is like just make it up, like you're uploading Metallica music to this, file storage thing, and then Metallica sues you, and then
Why would they
you know,
sue me? They love me.
they love
No.
it. They wouldn't sue you. You wouldn't steal whatever.
Yeah,
Uh,
you wouldn't steal a car.
you
Why
wouldn't
would you
steal
steal a
3D
song?
software. Yeah, why would you
Yeah,
steal a
exactly.
song? Uh, so that's like the customer would indemnify the vendor for that, and then something the vendor might indemnify the customer for, like if the customer gets sued for using the product and because like someone else's IP is in the
Right.
product
Right.
and they like incorporated open source that a license or someone else's thing. And so there are like, this is a gray area. Like, do the caps apply to indemnity?
Right.
And sometimes people try to make that explicit. There's debate about like maybe it's better to not be explicit about that. So this is like a more nuanced thing. But again, the idea, this is a case where it's really about trying to scope it to stuff that's really my fault that I have control over. So
Yep.
I'm not protecting you against something that's your own fault.
Yeah. So and within the, I call it the lull, right? The limitation of liability.
Yes.
Yeah, the lulls, just for the lulls. I think what at least this is my tactic around
Yeah.
it is I just try to make sure that the buyer understands like they I am not like there is risk in liability in doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Like you've got sensitive data, you're
Yep.
putting it somewhere. Like yes, you're giving it to me. You are not going to outsource the risk or the liability of that data to me and like now I got to pay if something happens to it, right? Now again, I have some responsibility for it, but acknowledging that there is just inherently some risk, like hey, there's bugs, there's other things that happen. So it is, and at any point there is responsibility and risk, and like just because you use a vendor doesn't mean that you don't have that risk in your business anymore. Of course you do.
Mhm.
So like I can't unlimited your liability because you have crypto keys.
Yes.
Like don't give me the keys. Like it's like do your thing. Anyway, that's kind of like my like a little bit of how I talk around that. I don't know how other people talk about it, but
Yeah, I think that is like that makes a lot of sense. And in my mind, this is one of the things that a great lawyer can really help with. Because I think sometimes people say like, oh, comp paper, you're just trying to like, box the lawyers out of the equation. And I think there's like a lot of things that are incredibly useful that a great lawyer can help with. One of which is like understanding the interaction between what your product does, the like stage of your product, your company, and like sort of what your risk posture should be,
mm,
and then like the specific concerns of this customer. Because like if you're selling to Coinbase versus if you're selling to common paper versus if you're selling to replicated, like we have very different risks,
right,
and we also represent different dollar values to a vendor. And if the vendor is a word processor versus a payment processor versus like security software, like they can, if they screw up, it messes us up in different ways. And so like, yeah, you always want your liability to be lower and you want to indemnify for narrow stuff, but like understanding how these things interact and sort of how to thread the needle in a really complicated thing where either this deal is going to make or break your company, or you're willing to walk away from it. You don't want to accept stuff. And like thinking all the other piece is just, what is this term gonna, is it gonna come back and bite us? Like
right,
when we're in diligence and getting acquired, what are they gonna think if we have unlimited liability? Is that really scary to them? Or do they maybe not care? If we have a thing that they have the right to break the contract, depending if we try to assign all the contracts to the acquirer, what does that
hmm
mean? So all those things are like sort of dependent on what kind of company you are, what do you want your outcome to be? And those are the things that it really could, I might choose something very different than you.
yeah, yeah. It is sort of interesting. I think there's like some of these mental things you have to like understand about contracts and about the business in order to be like kind of get into the mindset. And it's funny because I have a trick that I do to sometimes, and I just say, "Oh, I love contracts," right? So like this
Yeah.
is my favorite part, right? I love doing the contracts, and I try to just trick myself to say, "Oh, this is a fun puzzle," and I try to.
Mhm.
And when I get into the mindset of like, I kind of load up the context around like
Mhm.
what's market, what have we done in the past, how is this
Right.
supposed to work, then it actually isn't so bad. The
Mhm.
hardest part is when you enter into a conversation and there's like three lawyers on the other side. You've
Yeah.
got your lawyer, your salesperson. There's like you know, and you're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do here. That's the worst. When you
Yes.
have some of the context and you're a little bit prepared and you sort of can like reason about these things pretty well, it's it's not that bad. It's manageable.
I agree, and I have found a lot of things to be interested in this field. And like I am still like I am not a lawyer. I am not the world's expert on contract terms. Like I know a lot about the terms that are running through our system. And Tiffany, this attorney on our team, has taught me a tremendous amount and is a great communicator. And like for a lot of this stuff, one of her things that she's explained to me many times is that like for most contract things, it's very rare where it's like no, the answer is no, we can't do that, or the answer is yes, we should do that. It's just sort of like, what are the trade-offs? Like, it's not like illegal to take unlimited liability. You're not like, there's no one who's going to say to you later, you shouldn't have done that. It may turn out to be the wrong call, but it's just like, what is the risk that you're going to go out of business? That you might be willing to take pretty much any risk in the contract because this is the because it doesn't matter if your company takes on unlimited liability.
I've been there at some
Yeah,
points, in the replicated history where I was like, "Oh yeah, let's." I was like, "You know what? We need this. We need this customer. We need this at this point. Like, let's just This is we'll fix it in post, right? Like next year we'll be like, okay, if we're alive, we can't accept this term anymore. So
right.
yeah,
And so that is like, yeah. Sorry, again.
I was gonna put a sticky note on it and come back to it in a year. Yeah.
I've also seen the other side of it where I've like been talking to a lawyer who joined a company that had been running for like 5 years, and she's like, yeah, I went through some of the contracts, and like there's stuff in there saying like, can't wait to visit you in Bulgaria, smiley face emoji. And she's like, are we promising to go on site to this customer that's paying us $500 a year? Like, is that? And then I was like, no, I was just saying I look forward to visiting. It was like, no, that like that is an obligation of us in this contract. Like you can't just do that. And so, and like, who cares? Maybe the $500 contract doesn't matter. But like so your risk profile may change. Oh, and the other thing I was going to say before about like loading up the context and understanding what's going on, it
Yeah.
can be kind of rewarding. I think one of the other most frustrating situations is when you're selling to a big company, you have your champion who like totally gets what your product does, has the problem, like understands the solution, but they have so much specialization and division that like your contract gets sent to someone in procurement or some attorney that has zero context on what you
Oh
do.
yeah.
And then they're just like, well, we always ask for this. And it's like, well, like, you're asked, like, I remember at Stitch, this cloud data integration software, like someone was adamant we had to agree to their hard hat policy.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Nice.
I don't, like, we don't go on site. If we
But
were
I
going on site, we wouldn't be going to your construction site. I guess
but
if
if
I
I
was there,
did,
I would
I'd
wear
have
a
a
hard
hard
hat.
hat on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, but like, that there,
Yeah.
and I, because of what I do, I hear so many horror stories about like people who are just like saying to their champion, I am going to be breaking this contract on day one. And the champion is just like, I really need you to sign this contract. Like they won't let me buy this unless you agree to this. It's like, I don't have backup CDs. It's all delivered, it's like, whatever.
Sometimes
Yeah,
you just got to buy the team some hard hats and
that's right.
FedEx them out to everybody and be like, we're wearing these for the next month, everybody. You
It'd
know?
be worth it. It'd be worth it. And so yeah, it's just like deciding how important is this deal, how much do you want to fight over it, and can you get around it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The other part of this sort of like nodding along, knowing that like that's just not how it works, but you're like, all right, like I'm gonna sign it because this is the only way we're getting this deal done. And it's like maybe like there's no backup CDs, but like S3, we're like it's RDS and like there's backup. So it's
Yeah.
like, you know, who do I how maybe they have a CD, back. Who knows?
Yeah. Maybe if things really hit the fan, I'll burn a CD. I still have my old CD burner. It was last used to make a Sublime mixtape,
Yeah,
but now,
exactly.
yeah, and I think that is a reasonable point of view. It's really because
Yeah, sometimes you squint and you're just like,
yeah.
yeah, I can kind of see how that's basically the same thing.
And this is another case where like not only is most of this stuff like not a rule with a capital R because like there's
Yeah.
no one saying you can or can't do this, but like this is a question I always ask Tiffany. It's like, okay, tell me how this matters and the situation in which it goes really poorly for someone using the contract.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, there are many steps to get there. It is, okay, customer and vendor get pissed off at each other. They
Sure.
try to hash it out that way. Then they sue each other. And then this is getting interpreted. And as you said, it's like they're saying, okay, maybe you didn't have the CD, but you had the backup, and that does or doesn't satisfy the thing. And you don't know.
Right.
And then also, like, is this getting adjudicated in Delaware where they do this other thing all the time? Or is this getting adjudicated in France where you have no idea how they treat this? And so
Sure.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's it. It is one of these kind of unsexy but important parts of what we do, and figuring out how to do it quickly, do it well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to get a ton of red lines from customers. It's like, no, it's always painful. You don't want, yeah. So it's I can see the value. One thing I want to chat about really quick, because I'm going to make a guess, which is based on my experience, which is like we're pretty levered to like the success of the enterprise software ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that like 2022 timeframe was pretty painful for us because our customers were hurting, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, when like people are, you know, making tough decisions and layoffs and budget cutting and all these different things, did you see like, seat counts go down, or you like, how was that painful for both for you because it was painful for your customers, or were you still like kind of early enough where you were still growing through it, or how did you fare?
It was a lot less painful for us than I think it was for you. And I think for two reasons. One is because we were just so early in our life that, it was just, there wasn't a lot to lose that way. And then the other thing is that because, like I was talking about before, we, started really wide and then became really narrow on the early stage companies. And
Mm,
so a big proportion of our early customers were startups selling to other startups.
Mm,
And then, that has its own, ups and downs
sure.
for sure. And like we see seasonality on like multiple dimensions. Like obviously like end of quarter, end of month, things get more active. But then also just like in kinds of deals, certain things happen more in certain times a year. But we were small and our customers were smaller in 2022. So I think we just did not see it as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was tough. And then, I mean, and honestly, even in the like, I would say
Hmm.
7 years prior to that, we like never really had a customer like go out of business.
Mm,
And then like in the last 3 years, it's like more customers went out of business
yes.
than I like expected. I was like, oh, this is it's like there's a definitely a cliff. Like so yeah.
Yes, that we have certainly seen a bunch of where we not 100% of the time, but try to be proactive if someone is like churning or something like that or downgrading to the free plan, asking them for feedback, finding out what's going on. And it seems like there was a really big uptick in, hey, I love the product, we're winding down the company,
Yeah.
can't wait to use you in the next thing or something like that, or like I'm going to get a job, I'll see if they need a contract thing. So yeah, that went from not a big deal to like the number one source of churn for our
Yeah.
customers.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I mean, and even the acquihire, right, where they're getting
Yes.
rolled in, and it's like, well,
Yes.
they're gonna go onto this big company's paper, they're gonna end the product. And so it's like, that like those two kind of combined end up being,
Yes.
yeah, pretty
Exactly.
painful. And those are hard ones because it's really just like a market dynamic,
Hmm.
and it's not like, and to the point of like I have seen many of them come back
Yes.
as customers and
Totally.
become at more successful companies. So there is value there, but it's hard at the moment, right?
Yes. 100%. And in my last company, we had a board member who's like an independent. His name is Chuck Dietrich. He's a super successful entrepreneur over a couple of companies. And he, he gave me some feedback that I didn't really understand until like several years later, where it was something along the lines of like, really like understanding what your strategic bet is and then organizing the company behind that.
Mm,
And I think I like understood all the words he was saying, but didn't really internalize it for a while. Whereas like I just for example, I remember the early days of RJ, we had a sales meeting with someone at Comcast. And this I knew nothing at this point. And I was just like, they told me they had to use their contract. And I said, okay.
yeah,
And
sure.
I was like, could you tell me what is in it or show it to me? And the guy just like showed me on his desk this pile of papers. He's like, this is a vendor and I'm going to, send this back. And I was just like, we're not that kind of company. Like, I know that there's a million things behind that we need to do. And so like, we could dedicate everything to become that kind of company. And we
Mm,
would change our sales model. We would change our marketing strategy, change our product, and maybe we'd be successful, maybe we wouldn't. But like I knew enough at that point just to know like I have no idea, like there'd be dragons. And I feel like now for us, when we made that bet a couple of years ago to say, okay, we're going to start with startups, we needed to orient ourselves so that we could accept these early stage startups going out of business, and
mm,
not have a super high customer acquisition cost, to be able to be retained by the ones that do grow and have that balance it out. Like, what does that mean for our cost of acquisition? What does that mean for our cost of support? And just like organizing the company around that bet that we could do that, because you could say, I want to do this or I want to do that, but that has implications on how you do lots of other stuff.
yeah, it's interesting. It kind of I like that as like a framework, or a, you know find your, you call it your organizing bet, is that the
Yeah, it's the strategic bet, and then how do
is
you
that
organize behind it? So, like, what
yeah,
is the
okay.
thing that like it's right or wrong, but like that is the thing, like that we can acquire a whole ton of early stage companies and then grow with them and not burn ourselves out on that. Or I think it's lots of companies have been super successful saying we're going to focus on selling to the enterprise and we're not going to worry about the YC startup with two people who's trying to
Sure.
do that, or whatever the thing is that your company, like the fundamental thing you need to be successful for you to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. What any other kind of frameworks or patterns or just like, core beliefs around startups and this process of, building, selling, creating value? What are some of those foundational things for you?
Yeah, so one of our like core values as a company, and like I think we try to imbue a lot of parts of our company with it, is just the idea of like creating more value than you capture. And I think
Sure.
it's like we've modeled those docs after open source, and like we have actually gotten feedback from a lot of people that like, hey, I don't want to use the software. I get a ton of value out of the docs. I would pay you for that,
Mm,
but like I'm not going to pay you for the software. Like I really want to use this other thing. So is it okay if I like download a Word doc from you and then go upload it into company XYZ? And like that was a very explicit company design thing that we made. And part of it is we give this really valuable thing away for free and we invest a lot into it. And that is actually like our most important source of lead generation. And it also just like has all these, sorry, way to put it, like ancillary benefits that are hard to quantify or hard to know about in advance. Like I think it just sort of like lays positive groundwork. Like before we have a BD conversation with somebody and they check us out on our website and they're like, oh wow, this seems really great. I've wished someone would do this. So I think that like just buys you a lot in general. So that just idea of creating more capture, and like we think about how we do support or like how we price, and, we have a really generous free tier. That's just, part of a lot of the decisions we make, I think. And then maybe just the other thing that has been incredibly helpful for me is early in my career and my first job was actually at this VC firm, and I was like a junior analyst, cold calling companies and trying to invest in them. And then me and another person from there, Bob, from my co-founder for the first company, we left to start RJMetrics. And like I didn't know how to sell. Like I knew that some people were good at sales. And I reached out to the CEOs of one of the portfolio companies who
mm,
like he had run multiple portfolio companies, this guy Thomas Charlton. And his reputation was like amazing operator, would just like parachute into these companies that were doing poorly and like whip them into shape, and just like a really successful guy. And he was based in Philly, so it was like perfect that me and Bob like
great.
went with that. And I was just like, I'm going to be selling. How does one get good at that? Like I want people who have the money. I want them to give me the money. How does that
Yeah.
happen? And he's like, oh yeah, this is a skill you learn. We have training programs for this. There are companies that do training. Like we pay this company. In that case, it was like Sandler sales training, and like here are the materials. Like if you were a new salesperson at whatever company he was running at the time, this is what you would get. And like it included this audio recording of a series of lectures about how to do sales. And I like listened to it like 4 times. It was like a revelation to me. And I think it is useful both, number one, for doing sales, but I think it's like an incredible framework for just communicating with people, and like even like in relationships outside of work. Just like some of it is like really obvious stuff around like listening more than you talk or
Mm,
asking questions. But like one of the things that I really love the most, it's like as a salesperson, when you think about sales, you might like the first thing that comes into your mind is like the used car salesman, like the sleazy guy trying to trick you into something. And one of the ideas in this program was that like a much better seller is your doctor. And you walk into the doctor's office, and if the doctor would say, oh, hey, it looks like you need a cast, let me get one on you, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't know what's wrong with me. How do you know? But they ask you a bunch of questions and they say,
mm,
what brings you in here? Like, why are you here? What's the problem? What have you done to try to solve this before? How long has it been going on? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Do you have any theories about it? And then after all that, they take all that information and combine with the fact that they're wearing the white coat and they do this all the time and they've been to medical school. They say, you know what? I think you have a broken arm, and I need to do that. And just so why do you feel so much more confident in the things that they're saying? And can you make your interaction with a potential customer or a potential recruit or a partner or whatever feel like the confidence that you have in your doctor, where you listen, you ask questions, you make it feel, because you do this all the time. You're like, oh yeah, these are the indications of a broken arm. I see people with broken arms all the time. I give them casts, they feel better. You would ever need help deploying your software? I know all this. I've asked you all these questions. And so that all that framework of just sales as applied to just communicating with people where you maybe have the same goals, maybe you don't, you're trying to understand what they need. That is just a big up level in like my communication and effectiveness and just getting stuff done in general.
Interesting. Okay. This so specifically like the Sandler sales training. Is that the one that you're like? That's
That was
your
the one that
yeah
like I listened to first and had the most
yeah
impact on me. I have like subsequently listened to a handful of others and I thought they were good. And I think there's a lot of overlap in a lot of these things.
sure
None of the other ones like bowled me over in the same way,
okay.
but it's also like, I think I was going from zero to something. But yeah, I had a really positive impact from that. Yeah.
Do you have your sales folks and go to market folks like read it and
So
do it as
we
well?
had a big sales team at both Stitch and RJMetrics, and yeah, they all went through the Sandler
Yeah,
system. Common Paper has more of a product-led go-to-market, and so we actually
sure.
don't have full-time salespeople on the team now. I'm doing most of the sales, and
Yeah,
our product folks do a little bit. So there's not as formalized of a training program, but 100% that will be.
yeah,
Yeah, and I would default to Sandler. I think if we hired a sales leader and they were like, "Oh, challenger selling is the thing I love," I would say, "Great, let's try that." I don't have a reason to believe that that one is not as good as some other one or vice versa. But I think just the idea that sales is a learnable skill was
sure.
sort of like a mind blowing thing to me. Yeah. So that was like sort of wild.
Any other like how about like on the product side, any philosophies or things that you follow or things how do you think about that?
Yeah. I think like when I read the Lean Startup however many years ago, that was like uh, extremely eye opening to me. And I think there's still a lot of that influences how we build products. I think over time, I have, what's the right way to put it? Like, I was really into the empirical quantitative evidence earlier in my career. And like,
Mm,
so much so that like I sort of downplayed, the importance of brand, the importance of anything that can't be quantified, or like if we don't have statistical significance, I'm not really interested in hearing about it.
mm,
And as I have gotten more experienced, it turns out there's just a lot of things that it's impossible to get statistical significance on.
yeah,
And like I learned about, like, observe how I make decisions, or just learn about psychology, and it's like, wow, like there's a lot of things that are like pretty tough to measure that seem to have big outcomes on it. And so I could just pretend they don't exist, or I could use other criteria for making the decision. So I think I have become much less hardline about, like, I think I was like got data religion earlier in my career, and I think I've become much more modern. I was like a zealot early
yeah,
on,
yeah,
and I think I was like running a data company, so like it was like talking my
yeah,
book to some extent. But now I a lot more of my conversation with the team is like about like, wow, wouldn't that be an amazing moment for someone if they did this in the product and this thing happened? Like much less so than would that raise our conversion rate from 4 to 5%. Like I still want to know that stuff, and I'm still interested
sure.
in it, and I'm still like where it's possible. But a lot more of the time is spent about like, man, I would feel freaking awesome if the product did that. How would
Yeah.
that feel for you? And I think that's probably the best way to get to a conversion bump or retention bump or whatever you want.
Yeah. It's funny because I probably went a little bit like I probably started on the opposite extreme
Oh
and
yeah.
then came towards to now I'm more in the middle. Like I
Okay.
was much more like the, like it's the art, you got to feel it. Like
Yeah.
I'll know it when I see it, kind of like this whole a lot of intangibles and not really having the data to back much of it up, just being like,
Yeah.
I just kind of like, this is what I believe works. And this is like, I want great stuff. And like,
Yeah.
I think about taste.
Hmm.
And I still think that's important, but I've also like we didn't really like instrument much of our product. It replicated until like 2022, where like we kind
Okay.
of went through this downturn, and I was like, we don't really know like who's really using the product that much. We don't know like how many they do. So we brought this data team on. We got so much visibility into like all the actions and
Mhm.
who's like, and that became so valuable, right?
Yes.
Because we needed to get the data, but we just didn't have it. So like, and then you look at it, and you're like, oh, would have been pretty obvious that like a third of these customers are going to churn over the next 2 years, right? And we need to
Yes.
like figure out what to do there. But yeah, I sort of came from the vibes and moved towards the data now. But I think we're probably in the same place now. So it's funny.
I think you're right. And the other thing that is colors, I think, my perspective is that in a lot of cases, there's people that I've been working with, it's like my third company working with them. And I think we have like for a seed stage company, we have like tremendous visibility and instrumentation. Like we're like, and so I sort of, some of this stuff I sort of take for granted now. And like until, but, and like when we're building this new product and it's like, oh my gosh, we don't know what the most likely reason when someone uploads a file that doesn't have a successful outcome, like everybody's like, this is ridiculous. We need to fix this right away. So I think some of it is also like become in the water that I swim in. And so now I'm focused on the other stuff. But yeah, I bet we both sort of moderated and we're in the same ballpark now.
Yeah. It's, and I think you gotta figure it out. It's both sides, right? It is.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also like different situations just call for different sort of levers.
And then let's always got to wrap up a little more AI. So obviously you built this AI product, which is called Jerry.
Correct.
How else, like we'll talk about architecture there, but how else are you, I've told the story on this podcast, but like I basically became a prolific engineer on our team for like 2 or 3 months because I was like, these tools are so interesting. Yeah. And like, I just think the whole landscape is changing for how we build and develop. And like, we just built like a massive new product in like 6 or 7 weeks because of AI. And so like, just like all this stuff is changing how we work and what we do. But I'm curious how, it's impacting you, your business, how you're thinking about it,
Yeah, it's been an evolution because I think like a lot of people who started their company before like ChatGPT and like the current AI moment, we started by just sort of like sprinkling some AI stuff on the existing product. And so that was things like, hey, you're going to send an email to your customer when you send them the initial contract. Why don't we generate that email for you and like give you a button to make that friendlier or more formal? And that's useful. Or similarly, like you have a list of 70 contracts in the system. Might it nice to be like have summaries of all of them that you can get, stuff like that, which is useful, but it doesn't like fundamentally change how the product works. It just takes the product that exists and makes it better or adds features. I think as we got deeper into it and as the capabilities advanced, it became more apparent to us that like putting more into the current product is like, it's sort of like there are different assumptions in that you can make with something.
Yep.
And so like the value of structured data changes if you can, after the fact, extract meaning out of unstructured data. And similarly, like the interaction model can be very different if you are not assuming, certain things. So we thought it was useful to sort of like step back and say, okay, let's pause on adding more for the moment to that product. That's still lots of customers, lots of revenue. Like that's where we, that product's not going away or anything. It's still something we're investing in. But like, what would it mean if we sort of like went back to the drawing board with all these capabilities and rethought the assumptions? Like, what would we start over and build right now? And like that originally was some functionality in the main product. And then we realized like, okay, this is, there are some different assumptions, different data models. So like, let's make this a separate app and those apps can live together. Another thing that's just like a big implication for me personally is I have a 2-year-old daughter who like has a lot of delightful curiosity, and I want to encourage that and like reward it and participate in it. So like she'll just ask me like, what is that thing? And half the time I don't know what it is. And I just open up ChatGPT and go on video mode and look at it. And it's like, she wants to know what's the bump on a BlackBerry called. Turns out it's a druplet. And, or like we've got these windows here that have like wood in the middle of it. She's like, what's that part called? I'm like, I don't know. I look it up. It's a mullion. So like there's all these things that she's asking. And like, so I now like she and I interact together with ChatGPT like 15 times a day. And I think that's like great for just like, also, I didn't know that like ChatGPT could do all this stuff until she asked me questions and I didn't know how to answer them. So it's like, impacting my personal life as well. Oh, sorry. And then one last bit on the work front. There have been some things in our product that like we wanted to add we had to deprioritize because it just takes so long to build them. And then like we hadn't added more of them for a couple months. And then my co-founder was like, we haven't tried this with Cursor yet. Like we started using Cursor after we decided to stop doing this. Let me just take a day and see, or actually it's a different member of our team to just like see like, can she do it in a day now instead of 4 weeks? And we're going to see. And, I'll let you know in a week how successful she is.
Yeah. I'm gonna expect success, to be honest. Like we've seen it accelerate so many things. And I'm not like I taught myself how to program 15 years ago. I taught myself PHP and SQL. So like I am not a super talented engineer, and I got in and I was building features and doing everything by within weeks. And if you have some skill, and look, I had great folks to review PRs and things, but if you have some skill, you can just go so fast and get so much done and make changes and improve stuff. So I think we're going to have a lot better software in the next few years because of it.
So, and I think that's such an interesting question because I think there's a great chance you're right about that. I'm very confident we'll have more software, but like one of the, like when my co-founder did the 20-minute version of Ken, like we use Cursor all the time now, but he like basically like wrote a paragraph prompt for Cursor to design this feature. And the output of that was it did the feature, it made a million tiny things wrong. And he's like, okay, this version of it would not have saved me time because I need to go change all those things. So it's like, okay, let's do the day-long version of it where we like create a really like specific plan. And so one of the things I'll be really curious to see is it like certainly lowers the bar to creating new stuff. And I think some of that may be that just like stuff that's just sort of so-so gets out, which is great. More software in the world is a good thing, or at least I like that. And I think it also is potentially will be used to like make better stuff. But I don't know that it's necessarily true. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it to your point, all software that's done this way will not be better, but I think put in the hands of people, also like one-shotting a prompt to like get exactly what you want. It's just like not. It's like try to tell an engineer in one paragraph what you want, and you're going to get like garbage, right? So
right.
It requires a little more conversation. But like I just I think I integrated SAML, like a skim is like a protocol.
Yeah.
I integrated like skim into Replicated's core product in like 6 hours, right?
Oh,
and
wow.
that would have
That's
been
awesome.
like a much bigger product. And there's some things I think are going to be much more like able to do, where like there's really defined standards and like easy way to test it and all this kind of stuff. But like I don't know, I'm super bullish, and I it seems like, well, tell me, how do people find Jerry's? You said it's private beta, but is it
If they
sign
go
up?
to getjerry.ai, so they can go there, they can sign up, they can try it out. And so you can sign up for free and just give it a shot.
How do you spell Jerry?
Gerri.
Got
It's, as we all know, the general counsel on Succession was named Jerry. And so she was part of the inspiration. This is
got it.
No nonsense lawyer.
I could not watch Succession. I just hated everyone too much. So
they were terrible people.
Yeah.
But made me feel better about myself.
Oh, nice. Yeah. When there's literally no character that I can root for, I'm like, this is not. I'm like it. I just find myself being like these. I don't know who. We'll watch it at some point, but I couldn't get into it. But that's that's me.
Yeah. But Get Jerry is the name. Gerri. Getjerry.ai, and
Great.
that'll take you to a page on our site where you can sign up and give it a shot.
And if they go to commonpaper.com, I'm sure you can.
Oh yeah, for sure. There, if you go to commonpaper.com, there's a link to try it out there. So yeah.
Amazing, Jake. Thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Always fun to catch up.